Hey guys, tonight we're traveling to the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth, Yakutia in northeastern Siberia, where the thermometer doesn't just drop below freezing, it plummets to temperatures that would make Antarctica jealous. We're talking about a realm where minus 71 degrees Celsius is not a typo, where your eyelashes freeze together when you blink, and where exposed skin develops frostbite in under 2 minutes. This is a place so cold that car tires shatter like ceramic plates, spit freezes before it hits the ground, and the air itself seems to crystallize around you in glittering clouds of ice. You're about to experience what it means to survive in conditions that genuinely want you dead, where every breath you take could damage your lungs, and where the simple act of staying alive requires knowledge, preparation, and a fair bit of desperation. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this without help. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Are you bundled up in Canada? Sweating through a summer night in Australia? I love seeing where this little community spans across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off the small prop plane onto the frozen airstrip outside Oymyakon, and the cold doesn't just hit you, it attacks. Within seconds, the moisture in your nostrils freezes solid, creating tiny ice crystals that crack and shift with each breath. Your lungs contract involuntarily, your body's primitive warning system screaming that you're inhaling something fundamentally wrong. The air at minus 65 degrees Celsius feels sharp, almost metallic, like breathing in tiny shards of glass. You instinctively pull your scarf higher, but it's already stiffening, the condensation from your breath turning the fabric into a frozen mask against your face. The landscape before you is otherworldly. Endless white stretches to a horizon blurred by ice fog, a permanent mist of frozen water vapor that hangs in the air like a ghostly curtain. Stunted larch trees, the only species hardy enough to survive here, dot the terrain like skeletal sentinels, their bare branches coated in thick rime frost. The sun, even at midday in winter, barely crests the horizon, casting everything in a perpetual twilight of deep blues and pale golds. There's a quality to the light here that's difficult to describe, thin, almost transparent, as if the cold has leached the warmth from the photons themselves. Your guide, Dmitri, a Saka man whose family has lived in this region for generations, watches you with barely concealed amusement. His face, weathered and dark from a lifetime of reflected UV radiation off snow, shows the permanent windburn marks of someone who knows this land intimately. First time in real cold? He asks in accented English, though the question is clearly rhetorical. He's wearing what looks like an absurd amount of clothing, layers upon layers of fur, wool, and synthetic materials that make him appear almost twice his actual width. You'll learn why soon enough. The village of Oymyakon, holder of the record for the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth, consists of about 500 hardy souls who've decided that yes, living where the temperature regularly drops below minus 60 degrees Celsius is perfectly reasonable. The name itself is darkly ironic. It derives from the Saka word keem, meaning unfrozen water, referring to a nearby hot spring that prevents one small section of a local stream from freezing. Everything else? Frozen solid from October through April. You trudge toward the village, and with each step, you learn new lessons about extreme cold. Your boots, rated for minus 40 degrees Celsius, are already inadequate. The cold seeps through the soles, numbing your feet despite 2 layers of wool socks. Dmitri notices your gait changing and shakes his head. You need Valenki, he says, referring to the traditional Russian felt boots that locals swear by. And you walk wrong. Smaller steps, less sweat. It seems counterintuitive, you want to move fast to stay warm, but he's right. Sweating in this environment is a death sentence. Moisture is your enemy. Once your inner layers get damp, their insulating properties collapse, and you become a slowly freezing popsicle wrapped in expensive outdoor gear. The village itself looks like something from a dystopian science fiction film. Buildings squat close to the ground, their foundations set on stilts driven deep into the permafrost. You can't build directly on the ground here because the heat from a building would melt the permafrost beneath it, causing the structure to sink and collapse. Every building sits elevated, with the space beneath left open to allow the killing cold to circulate and keep the ground frozen solid. Chimneys pump constant streams of smoke into the air, fires that cannot be allowed to die, because restarting them when everything is frozen requires resources and time you might not have. Historians know that humans have inhabited this region for thousands of years, with archaeological evidence of settlements dating back to the Neolithic period. Think about that for a moment. People with stone tools wearing animal skins, somehow surviving in conditions that kill modern adventurers with satellite phones and Gore-Tex. The indigenous Saka people, also known as Yakuts, developed survival strategies so effective that they're still used today, often proving superior to modern technology. You're led to what will be your shelter, a traditional balagan, a Saka dwelling that looks like a cross between a log cabin and an igloo. It's partially sunken into the ground for insulation, with walls made of larch logs chinked with moss and clay, and a roof of overlapping birch bark and turf. Inside, a small stove radiates blessed heat, but even here, frost creeps along the upper corners where the warmth doesn't quite reach. Your breath is still visible even indoors. Dmitri explains that keeping the interior above freezing is a victory. Anything more is luxury. He shows you the stove, a metal barrel converted into a wood burner that will become the absolute center of your existence here. Never let it die, he warns. In 2 hours at night, inside temperature drops to -30 degrees Celsius. By morning, everything freezes. Water, food, you. This isn't hyperbole. People have died in their sleep when their fires went out and they didn't wake in time. The cold here is patient and relentless, always probing for weakness, always waiting for you to make a mistake. You notice that water is already provided. A large barrel of ice chunks sits near the stove. Not liquid water, just ice that you'll need to melt constantly. Every drop of water you drink here requires fuel to melt and heat it. The irony isn't lost on you. You're surrounded by frozen water, literally living on top of it. Yet obtaining drinkable water requires constant effort and resources. Dehydration is a serious risk in extreme cold because your body still needs water, but the effort required to produce it often means people don't drink enough. Dmitri hands you a metal cup and gestures to a pot on the stove. Tea. Always hot tea. You take a sip, and it's not what you expected. A bitter, smoky brew made from boiled larch bark and local herbs. It tastes like drinking a campfire, but there's something oddly comforting about it. A warmth that seems to spread deeper than normal tea. Vitamin C, Dmitri explains. In winter, no fresh vegetables, no fruits. This keeps scurvy away. The Saka people figured out centuries ago that coniferous bark, particularly larch and pine, contains enough vitamin C to prevent the disease that killed so many Arctic explorers. Traditional knowledge proven by modern science. Your first night is an education in discomfort. Despite the fire, despite your sleeping bag rated for extreme conditions, the cold finds you, creeps in through tiny gaps, settles into the spaces between your layers, and makes your bones ache. You wake multiple times to feed the stove, stumbling in the darkness, your fingers clumsy and numb as you shove in more wood. By morning, you understand that survival here isn't about one heroic effort. It's about constant vigilance, an endless series of small tasks that prevent the cold from gaining a foothold. When dawn finally arrives, a reluctant, pale thing that barely qualifies as daylight, you step outside to answer nature's call and learn another brutal lesson. The outhouse is a small wooden structure 30 meters from the main building, because keeping a toilet inside would introduce moisture and waste into your living space. The walk there, exposed to wind that's picked up overnight, is genuinely dangerous. You move fast, do your business faster, not easy when multiple layers need to be negotiated, and rush back. Toilet paper, you discover, is pre-torn and kept inside your coat, because if you leave it in the outhouse, it freezes into unusable sheets of solid paper. Dmitri finds you clutching a cup of that bark tea, shivering despite being inside. Today, you learn to prepare, he says. Tomorrow, we go out, gather food, check traps, find water source. You need to be ready. You nod, wondering what being ready actually means in a place like this. You're about to find out. He shows you how to layer clothing properly, and it's a science. First, a thin synthetic base layer that wicks moisture away from your skin. Then wool, which retains some insulating properties even when damp. Then more wool. Then fur, reindeer fur specifically, with each hair hollow and filled with air, creating incredible insulation. Then an outer layer of wind-resistant material. Your hands require similar attention. Thin silk gloves, then wool mittens, then enormous fur mittens that make you look like you're wearing small animals on your hands, which technically you are. Your face requires special attention. Dmitri produces what looks like a medieval torture device. A leather and fur face mask with small slits for eyes and breathing holes for your nose and mouth. Below -50 degrees Celsius. You wear this always outside, he instructs. Your face, it will freeze. Nose, cheeks, lips, frostbite in minutes. He's not exaggerating. At these temperatures, exposed skin freezes so quickly that you can literally watch it happen. The flesh turning white and hard as the cellular structure ruptures from ice crystal formation. You practice the breathing technique he teaches. Small, shallow breaths through your nose, warming the air before it hits your lungs. At extreme temperatures, deep breathing can actually damage lung tissue, causing a condition called frost lung that feels like you've inhaled acid. Some scholars still debate whether traditional peoples actually adapted physiologically to cold climates or if their advantage was purely cultural and technological, but the evidence leans heavily toward the latter. Humans are tropical animals who learn to survive everywhere through knowledge and tools, not biological adaptation. The rest of the day is spent in preparation that would bore most people, but here means the difference between life and death. You sharpen knives, check all your gear for cracks or wear, organize your supplies into easily accessible locations. Dmitri shows you how to identify good firewood, the dead larch branches that snap cleanly, the birch bark that catches fire even when frozen. You learn to recognize the subtle signs of hypothermia in yourself. Confusion, sluggish thinking, the dangerous warmth that makes people want to remove their clothing just before they die. As night falls again and you feed the stove for the dozenth time, you realize something profound. You've been here less than 24 hours, and you're already exhausted. The cold is draining you, forcing your body to burn massive amounts of calories just to maintain core temperature. Dmitri mentioned that people here eat 5,000 to 6,000 calories per day in winter. Not because they're particularly active, but because staying alive in this cold is metabolically expensive. Your body is a furnace, and in Yakutia you need to keep that furnace roaring. You fall asleep to the sound of the wind howling outside, the fire crackling, and the strange creaking sounds that ice makes as it expands and contracts with temperature fluctuations. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howls, one of the hardy Saka lycus that somehow thrive in this frozen hell. You burrow deeper into your furs and sleeping bag, grateful for this shelter, this fire, this knowledge that others have passed down through countless generations. Tomorrow, you'll venture out into the real cold. Tonight, you're alive, and that's enough. You wake to Dmitri shaking your shoulder, and for a moment, you're disoriented, wondering why your face feels frozen despite being inside. Then you remember, you're in Yakutia, where inside and warm are not synonymous. The fire has burned down to coals overnight, and the temperature in the Balagan has dropped precipitously. Your breath creates thick plumes of vapor that hang in the air like miniature clouds. Frost has formed on the inside of the walls, delicate crystalline patterns that would be beautiful if they weren't such a stark reminder of how thin the barrier is between you and death. We build better shelter today, Dmitri announces, already fully dressed in his layers of fur and wool. This one is okay for summer, but you need to understand how to make real winter Balagan. You're confused for a moment. This is a real structure with walls and a roof and a stove. What more could you need? Everything, as it turns out. Outside, the temperature has dropped further overnight. The thermometer mounted on a post reads -68 degrees Celsius, and the world has transformed into something alien and hostile. The ice fog is so thick you can barely see 30 meters ahead. Everything is muffled, sounds dampened by the dense frozen air. Your first breath, even through the face mask Dmitri insisted you wear, feels like inhaling needles. Your second breath is more controlled, smaller, warmer. You're learning. The location Dmitry has chosen for your shelter is near a small stand of large trees. Close enough for firewood, but not so close that falling branches pose a danger. The ground here is permafrost soil that's been frozen solid for thousands of years. In summer, the top meter or so might thaw, creating a boggy, muddy mess, but now it's harder than concrete and just as difficult to work with. First, we dig, Dmitry says, handing you a pickaxe. You stare at the frozen ground, then at him, certain he's joking. He's not. Half-meter down. This gives insulation from wind, holds heat better. You swing the pickaxe, and the impact sends shockwaves up your arms as the tool bounces off the frozen earth with a metallic clang. You've barely made a dent. Dmitry watches you struggle for a few minutes, then demonstrates the technique. Smaller swings, more precision, aiming for the same spot repeatedly to create fractures in the frozen soil. It's exhausting work, and within minutes you're sweating despite the killing cold. Exactly what Dmitry warned you against. Stop, he commands, noticing your dampening collar. Rest. Small amounts of work, then rest. Then work again. You sweat too much, you die tonight. It's a casual statement, delivered without drama, which somehow makes it more chilling than any theatrical warning. He's simply stating a fact. Moisture management in extreme cold is survival. You strip off your outer layer to let the sweat evaporate in the dry, frozen air, waiting until your base layer is dry before continuing. The cold is brutal during these rest periods, but it's necessary. This is survival calculus, discomfort now versus death later. The excavation takes hours. You and Dmitry work in shifts, 20 minutes on, 10 minutes warming by a small fire he's built nearby. Gradually, the depression takes shape. A rectangular pit about 4 meters long, 3 meters wide, and half a meter deep. Your hands are cramping, your back is screaming, and you've developed a newfound respect for the Saka people who did this with inferior tools in worse conditions, and probably while also hunting, gathering firewood, and caring for children. Next comes the framework. Dmitry has pre-cut larch poles of various sizes, and you begin constructing the skeleton of the balagan. The main support poles are sunk into holes chipped into the permafrost at the corners of your pit, then angled inward to create a conical or dome-like structure. Horizontal poles are lashed to these supports with leather strips, not rope, which becomes brittle and snaps in extreme cold, but flexible rawhide that maintains some give even when frozen. The construction is ingenious, designed to shed snow and wind while creating maximum interior space with minimum materials. Why not build walls straight up? You ask through your face mask, your words muffled and strange. Dmitry shakes his head. Wind. Straight walls catch wind, create pressure, collapse. Slanted walls, wind goes over, around. Also, angled roof, snow slides off. Flat roof. Snow builds up, very heavy, breaks through. It's engineering born from necessity, refined over generations. Modern architecture is only recently rediscovering some of these principles, marketing them as innovative design when they're actually ancient common sense. The walls come next, and this is where things get interesting. You're not using modern insulation, no fiberglass bats or foam boards. Instead, Dmitry shows you how to gather sphagnum moss from areas where it's frozen in accessible clumps. Sphagnum moss, even when frozen, retains incredible insulating properties. It's what peat is made from, and it can hold up to 20 times its weight in water when thawed. Here, frozen and dry, it becomes a natural insulation material that outperforms many modern alternatives. You pack the moss between an inner and outer wall framework, creating a thick barrier against the cold. The work is meticulous and time-consuming. Each section must be tightly packed, with no gaps for wind to penetrate. Your fingers, even in gloves, grow clumsy with cold. You have to stop regularly to warm them, flexing and moving them to maintain circulation. Frostbite is a constant threat, and you find yourself obsessively checking your extremities. Toes, fingers, nose, ears, for the telltale numbness that precedes tissue damage. Historians have documented that indigenous Arctic peoples developed remarkably sophisticated dwelling designs, with some structures featuring double-wall construction, underground entry tunnels to prevent heat loss, and carefully calculated ventilation systems. What's still debated among scholars is exactly when these innovations emerged. Some argue they're relatively recent adaptations from the past few centuries, while others contend they're far older, perhaps dating back thousands of years. The archaeological record is frustratingly incomplete, as organic materials don't preserve well in freeze-thaw cycles. Over the walls, you layer birch bark, which Dmitry has harvested in warmer months and stored. Birch bark is remarkable stuff, waterproof, flexible, and resistant to decay. The indigenous peoples of Siberia used it for everything from roofing to boat construction to writing material. You overlap the sheets like shingles, working from bottom to top, securing them with wooden pegs rather than nails, which would conduct cold directly through the insulation. The final outer layer is turf and soil, creating a living roof that will eventually support plant growth in summer and provides additional insulation year-round. By the time you're finished with the walls and roof, the structure has transformed from a skeleton of poles into something that actually looks like it might keep you alive. The walls are nearly 40 centimeters thick. Absurd by modern standards, but here absolutely necessary. Now comes the most critical element, the entrance. You can't have a regular door. It would let out too much heat and let in too much cold every time it opened. Instead, Dmitry shows you how to construct a low tunnel entrance, barely large enough to crawl through on hands and knees. The tunnel is about 2 meters long, angled downward slightly before rising into the main living space. This design is brilliant. Cold air, being denser, sinks and stays in the tunnel rather than entering the living area. Warm air stays inside. It's a natural airlock requiring no technology beyond understanding how air behaves at different temperatures. Very important, Dmitry emphasizes. You always close tunnel with furs with packed snow. Never leave open, and you make ventilation hole at top. He indicates where you'll need to create a small opening at the peak of the structure, directly above where the stove will sit. Carbon monoxide poisoning has killed countless people in poorly ventilated winter shelters. The hole needs to be large enough to let smoke and carbon monoxide escape, but small enough to minimize heat loss. Another delicate balance. Inside the completed structure, the difference is immediately apparent. Even without a fire, the temperature is noticeably warmer than outside, perhaps minus 30 degrees Celsius instead of minus 68 degrees Celsius. Not comfortable by any stretch, but survivable. The thick walls block the wind entirely, and the silence inside is almost eerie after hours of howling wind. You can hear your own heartbeat, your breathing, the small creaks and pops of the structure settling. Dmitry helps you install the stove, not a modern airtight model, but a simple metal box with a chimney pipe that extends through the roof. The stove sits on flat stones to prevent the heat from melting the permafrost beneath the structure. You see why we dig down? Dmitry asks. Heat rises. If we build on surface, heat goes up and out. Here, heat goes up, hits roof, spreads sideways, comes down walls, stays inside better. The sunken floor design is essentially a heat trap, and it works remarkably well. You arrange sleeping platforms, raised wooden frames covered with fir branches and furs. Never sleep directly on the ground, even indoors, because the earth will suck the heat right out of you. The platforms are positioned away from the stove, not because you want to be cold, but because you need gradual temperature zones. Too close to the stove and you'll overheat and sweat. Too far and you'll freeze. You need the Goldilocks zone. There's a quirky survival practice that Dmitry mentions almost casually, keeping a layer of ice on the interior walls. It sounds counterintuitive. Why would you want ice inside your shelter? But he explains that the ice acts as an additional vapor barrier, preventing the moisture from your breathing and cooking from penetrating into the moss insulation. If the insulation gets wet, it loses its effectiveness. The ice layer, ironically, keeps the insulation dry. Nature has strange solutions sometimes. As you're finishing the interior arrangements, you notice Dmitry constructing something odd in one corner, a small shelf-like structure near the roof. Food storage, he explains. Always keep food high and cold. Keeps fresher. Also keeps away from mice and rats. Even here, in this frozen wasteland, rodents survive, living in the margins, stealing what they can. They're surprisingly resourceful, these tiny survivors, and they'll chew through almost anything to get to food. The final touch is setting up a water collection system. Dmitri shows you how to position containers to catch any dripping condensation from the ceiling, though he warns that this won't produce much. Your primary water source will still be melted ice and snow, but every drop counts. He also designates a specific corner for night soil, human waste that will freeze solid almost immediately and can be removed periodically. Glamorous? No. Necessary? Absolutely. By the time you finish, darkness is falling again. That early, perpetual darkness of Arctic winter. You've been working for nearly 12 hours with minimal breaks, and you're utterly exhausted. But as you crawl through the entrance tunnel and into your new shelter, as Dmitri lights the first fire in the stove and warmth begins to spread through the space, you feel something unexpected. Pride. You've built something with your hands, using ancient techniques, in conditions that would kill you without shelter. This balagan might not be much to look at, but it's yours, and it might just keep you alive through the winter. The fire crackles, smoke drawing cleanly up through the chimney. The walls hold. The wind howls outside, but inside you're protected. You prepare a simple meal, dried fish rehydrated in boiling water, making a weak broth, and as you eat, you understand something fundamental about human survival. We're not strong. We're not fast. We don't have claws or thick fur or natural weapons. What we have is knowledge, passed down through generations, the accumulated wisdom of thousands of people who figured out, through trial and error, how to survive in places that should be impossible. This balagan is more than a shelter. It's a library of survival. Every design choice a lesson someone learned the hard way. You settle onto your sleeping platform, adding wood to the stove before bedding down. Outside, the temperature continues to drop. Inside, you're warm enough to survive. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but tonight, you've accomplished something significant. You've created habitat where none should exist. You wake to a cold that's penetrated your bones despite the shelter, despite the sleeping furs, despite everything. The fire has burned down again, and you can see your breath in thick clouds. Your first thought, still groggy with sleep, is to burrow deeper into the furs and wait for warmth to magically appear. Your second thought, more alert now, is that warmth will never appear unless you create it. This is the fundamental reality of Yakutia in winter. Heat is not a given. It's an achievement, something you must actively produce every single hour of every single day. Dmitri is already awake, feeding the stove with careful precision. Today you learn the most important thing, he says, his voice still rough with sleep. How to make heat inside your body, not just outside. You assume he's talking about exercise, maybe some traditional calisthenics, but you're wrong. He's talking about something far more primal and far stranger. You're going to learn to boil bark and roots not just for tea, but for the metabolic fire they create within you. After a breakfast of frozen fish, which you eat semi-thawed because fully thawing it would take too much fuel, Dmitri bundles you into your layers and leads you outside into the killing cold. The thermometer reads -69 degrees Celsius, and the world is a study in hostile beauty. The sun, barely above the horizon even at midday, casts long shadows across the snow. Ice fog hangs in the air, and each breath you take creates an instant cloud that freezes and falls to the ground as tiny ice crystals, a phenomenon locals call the whisper of stars. Your destination is a stand of Siberian larch trees about a kilometer from the balagan. In summer, this would be a pleasant 10-minute walk. In this cold, traveling a kilometer requires planning and effort comparable to a minor expedition. You move slowly, conserving energy, breathing shallowly through your nose. Every 20 minutes, you stop to check your extremities for frostbite and to let your body temperature stabilize. You're learning the rhythm of Arctic travel. Move, rest, assess, repeat. The larch trees stand like frozen sentinels, their needles long since dropped for winter. Larch is one of the few conifers that loses its needles seasonally, a quirky adaptation that helps it survive extreme cold by reducing surface area for moisture loss and ice accumulation. Dmitri approaches one of the younger trees and produces a knife with a blade darkened by years of use. You watch carefully, he instructs. This knowledge keeps you alive when everything else fails. He selects a section of bark on the south-facing side of the tree, where it's slightly thicker. With careful cuts, he peels back a strip about as wide as your hand and as long as your forearm. The bark comes away in layers, thick outer bark that's rough and dark, and inner bark that's pale, almost white, with a fibrous texture. Inner bark, Dmitri explains. This is what we need. Outer bark. Good for fire starting, for roofing, but not for eating. Eating? You're going to eat tree bark? He demonstrates stripping the inner bark from the outer, creating thin, ribbon-like pieces that he folds and tucks into a leather pouch. Larch bark has sugars, has nutrients, has medicine, he continues. In winter, when no other food, people survive on this. But more important, when you eat this, when you boil and drink, it creates heat in belly, in blood. Makes your body warm from inside. You try your hand at harvesting bark from another tree, and it's harder than it looks. Cut too deep and you damage the tree's cambium layer, potentially killing it. Cut too shallow and you get nothing useful. The knife, cold enough to burn your skin if you touch the metal directly, requires a firm grip that's difficult to maintain in thick gloves. After several attempts, you manage to extract a decent strip of inner bark, and Dmitri nods approval. Good. Now we find roots. He leads you to an area where the snow is shallower, swept clear by wind. Using a small axe, he begins chopping at the frozen ground near the base of a larch tree. You join in, and the work is brutal. The ground is so hard that each strike sends jarring vibrations through your arms. Sweat begins to form despite the cold, and you have to stop repeatedly to let it evaporate. After nearly an hour of work, you've excavated down about 30 centimeters and exposed some of the tree's lateral roots. These roots are surprisingly thick, some as wide as your wrist, and they extend far from the trunk. Dmitri selects a smaller root and begins the painstaking process of freeing it from the frozen earth. Take only what you need, he says. Tree must live. We must live. Everyone lives together. It's a philosophy you'll hear repeatedly. The land provides, but only if you don't take too much. Greed in this environment doesn't just harm nature. It harms you because you depend on these resources renewing themselves. The root section he finally extracts is about a meter long and quite fresh-looking despite the cold. He cuts it into smaller segments with his knife, then uses the blade to scrape away the outer layer, revealing pale wood underneath. Root has more nutrients than bark, he explains. More calories, more sugars, but harder to get, so we use both. He's building your survival knowledge like constructing the Balagan. Layer upon layer of information, each piece supporting the others. By the time you return to the shelter, you're carrying several kilos of bark and roots, and you're utterly exhausted. Your face, despite the mask, has developed small patches of frostbite on the cheekbones. Pale white spots that don't hurt yet, but will later. Dmitri spots them immediately and brings you close to the stove, but not too close. Warm slowly, he warns. Too fast, tissue damage is worse. The frostbitten areas begin to tingle, then ache, then burn with surprising intensity as circulation returns. It's a painful lesson in the importance of checking your face regularly when outside. Now comes the process that seems almost alchemical, transforming bark and roots into something that will warm you from within. Dmitri fills a large iron pot with ice chunks and sets it on the stove to melt. While waiting, he prepares the bark and roots, cutting them into smaller pieces and crushing some of them with a smooth rock. More surface area, better extraction. He notes, sounding almost like a chemist, which in a way he is. Once the water is boiling, he adds the bark and root pieces, and immediately the water begins to change color, turning a deep amber brown. A sharp, resinous smell fills the Balagan. Not unpleasant, but intense, like being inside a forest on a hot summer day. He lets this boil for nearly an hour, occasionally adding more wood to keep the fire hot, sometimes crushing the softened bark and roots further with a wooden spoon to extract more of their essence. The old people, Dmitri says as he tends the pot, they knew which trees to use, which roots to dig, what time of year each plant has most power. The Saka survived here for thousands of years with this knowledge. Historians have documented extensive traditional ecological knowledge among Siberian indigenous peoples, with some anthropologists arguing that this represents one of the most sophisticated systems of botanical knowledge ever developed. Others debate whether such systems were truly comprehensive or if they've been romanticized in modern retellings, but the fact remains. People survived here long before supermarkets and vitamin supplements. The resulting brew, when Dmitri finally deems it ready, looks like strong tea and smells powerfully of pine and earth. He pours you a cup and you take a cautious sip. The taste is complex, bitter and sweet simultaneously, with notes of resin and something almost like caramel. It's not delicious exactly, but it's not terrible either. More importantly, as you swallow, you feel warmth spreading through your chest and stomach in a way that regular tea doesn't produce. Drink slowly, drink all of it. Dmitri instructs, pouring himself a cup. This is calories, this is vitamins, this is medicine. Makes your blood warm, helps body make heat. You're skeptical, how can tree bark create warmth beyond just being a hot liquid? But as you finish the cup and sit quietly, you notice something remarkable. Your core temperature seems higher. Your fingers and toes, which had been perpetually cold, feel warmer. It's not dramatic, but it's real. Dmitri explains the science, or at least the traditional understanding of it. The inner bark and roots contain sugars, starches, and complex carbohydrates that your body can metabolize for energy. They also contain essential oils and compounds that stimulate circulation. Modern analysis has confirmed that larch bark contains arabinogalactans, complex polysaccharides that have immune-boosting properties and provide slow-release energy. The essential oils include pinene and other terpenes that increase blood flow to extremities. The old knowledge wasn't superstition, it was biochemistry learned through observation. Over the next hours, Dmitri shows you variations on this theme. Pine bark, boiled similarly, produces a different flavor profile and different medicinal effects. More astringent, better for stomach issues. Willow roots, when available, contain salicylic acid, the compound that aspirin is based on, useful for pain and inflammation. Birch bark makes a tea that's diuretic and helps prevent kidney stones, a real concern when you're eating mostly meat and fish. Spruce needles, though not available now in winter, can be gathered and dried in autumn to provide vitamin C through the dark months. He also shows you how to prepare emergency food from these materials. The inner bark, after boiling, can be dried and ground into a coarse flour that can supplement your diet when other food is scarce. It's not tasty, fibrous, and bland, but it's calories, and in survival situations, taste is irrelevant. Some indigenous groups traditionally made a kind of flatbread from bark flour mixed with fish eggs or animal fat, creating a dense, nutritious food that could sustain life through the worst winters. There's a certain dark humor in the fact that you're literally eating trees to survive, and Dmitri acknowledges this with a rare smile. City people, they eat pills, vitamins, supplements from store, he says. We eat forest. Forest is pharmacy. Forest is supermarket. Forest is everything. You just need to know how to shop. You spend the afternoon practicing, harvesting more bark, digging more roots, preparing various brews and concoctions. Your hands become stained brown from the tannins, and your fingernails develop a permanent dark line underneath no amount of washing will remove. It's the mark of someone who works with bark, and you wear it with unexpected pride. As evening approaches and you prepare another pot of bark tea, this time adding some dried berries Dmitri produces from his supplies for flavor, you reflect on what you've learned. In most places, warmth comes from external sources. Fires, furnaces, heaters, warm buildings. Here, in the coldest inhabited place on Earth, warmth must also be generated internally. Your body is a furnace, and you must constantly feed it the right fuel. Not just any food, but foods that create heat, that stimulate circulation, that keep the metabolic fires burning. The bark and root tea is just one tool in the arsenal of internal warming techniques. Dmitri mentions others: eating raw frozen fish, which requires your body to expend energy thawing and digesting it, thus generating heat. Consuming rendered animal fat, which provides dense calories that burn slowly and steadily. Drinking bone broth, rich in collagen and minerals that support the body's temperature regulation systems. Each food is chosen not just for nutrition but for its thermogenic properties, its ability to make your body produce heat. You drink another cup of the bark tea as night falls, and this time you focus on the sensation. The warmth isn't just in your stomach. It spreads through your limbs, makes your skin tingle slightly, seems to push back against the encroaching cold in a way that external heat alone cannot. For the first time since arriving in Yakutia, you feel warm not just on the surface but deep in your core. It's a strange, profound sensation, this internal fire kindled by trees that have themselves learned to survive temperatures that would kill most living things. Before sleep, you help Dmitri prepare a large batch of bark tea to last through the next day. The pot bubbles on the stove, filling the balagan with its forest-scent steam. Outside, the wind howls and the temperature drops further, but inside, you have warmth, shelter, and knowledge. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. The endless quest for water, the daily hunt for food in a frozen landscape, the psychological weight of winter darkness. But tonight, you've learned something fundamental. Survival in extreme cold isn't just about resisting the environment, it's about working with it, using what the land provides in ways both ancient and sophisticated. You fall asleep with the taste of larch bark still on your tongue, and in your dreams, you're a tree, roots deep in frozen earth, drawing sustenance from stone and ice, surviving against all odds through patience and adaptation. The sound that wakes you is rhythmic and violent, the unmistakable crack of metal striking ice. You crawl from your sleeping furs, disoriented and groggy, to find Dmitri already dressed and wielding a long iron bar with a chisel point. He's attacking a barrel near the entrance, and it takes your foggy brain a moment to understand what's happening. The barrel, which yesterday contained liquid water you'd painstakingly melted from ice, has frozen solid overnight despite being indoors, despite the fire that burned through the night. Water, the most basic necessity of human survival, has become a luxury requiring constant labor. This is the real enemy, Dmitri says without stopping his work, each word punctuated by another strike. Not cold exactly. Water. Getting water. Keeping water. Not wasting water. He breaks through the ice in the barrel and extracts a few chunks, tossing them into a pot on the stove. In desert, you die from no water. Here, you die from no water, but water is everywhere. Irony, yes. After a meager breakfast of dried fish and yesterday's bark tea, reheated and slightly bitter from sitting overnight, you prepare for what Dmitri calls the water expedition. It sounds almost adventurous, but the reality is grimly practical. Every drop of water you drink, cook with, or use for washing must be obtained through effort that would seem absurd anywhere else on Earth. You're surrounded by frozen water. Snow blankets everything. Ice extends meters deep into the ground. The river is a solid highway of ice. Yet obtaining drinkable water requires tools, fuel, time, and knowledge. The journey to the river takes 30 minutes, though it's less than a kilometer away. You're learning to move at the winter pace, slow, deliberate, conserving energy. The river, when you reach it, is nothing like you imagined. There's no water visible, just a wide expanse of white that's slightly lower than the surrounding terrain, marked by pressure ridges where the ice buckled and heaved during the freeze. The ice here is over a meter thick, possibly 2 meters in places, and reaching the water beneath requires tools and technique. Dmitri has brought a long iron ice auger, a spiral drill bit attached to a handle, and what looks like a medieval pickaxe. He selects a spot away from the main current channel, thinner ice, faster drilling, and begins the process. First, he clears away the snow cover, revealing the bluish-white ice beneath. Then he positions the auger and begins to turn. The work is brutally hard. Even with the specialized tool, drilling through a meter of ice in minus 65 degrees Celsius temperatures tests human endurance. Dmitri works in 15-minute shifts, then hands the auger to you. Your first attempt is comically ineffective. You're not putting enough weight into it, not maintaining the right rhythm. Stand directly over, push down, turn smooth, he coaches. Ice fights back. You must be stronger. You find the rhythm eventually, and the auger begins to bite deeper. Ice chips spray up with each turn, glittering in the weak sunlight before falling to the snow. Your arms burn, your back aches. Sweat begins to form despite the cold, and you have to stop to remove a layer before you overheat dangerously. This is the paradox of Arctic survival. Too cold if you're still, too hot if you're working hard, and a narrow, constantly shifting zone of acceptable temperature in between. After nearly an hour of combined effort, the auger breaks through. Water, dark and almost black-looking against the blue ice, wells up in the hole. It's flowing water, liquid and mobile, and for a moment you're transfixed by something that would be utterly mundane anywhere else. Dmitri produces a long-handled ladle and begins scooping water into containers he's brought. "Take what we need, no more," he says. "Tomorrow, hole might freeze closed, might not. We mark it, remember location, hope." The water is shockingly cold, obviously, but there's something else about it, a peculiar quality you can't quite define. "Tastes different, yes?" Dmitri asks, noticing your expression. "River water in winter is very pure, very cold, very alive. Summer water is warm, has algae, has mud. This water is best water." You have to trust him on that because to you, it just tastes like water that wants to give you hypothermia from the inside out. Historians have documented that indigenous Arctic peoples developed numerous strategies for obtaining water in winter, from the simple, melting ice and snow, to the sophisticated, maintaining permanent ice holes, harvesting specific types of ice that melt more efficiently, understanding which snow is safe to melt versus which contains too many impurities. What scholars still debate is how much traditional knowledge has been lost versus adapted. Many modern Saka use the same techniques their ancestors did, but with updated tools, blurring the line between traditional and contemporary practice. Loading the water containers onto a small sled, because carrying heavy loads in deep cold burns calories you can't afford to waste. You begin the return journey. Dmitri moves quickly now, and you understand why. The water in the containers is already beginning to freeze, creating a slush that will become solid ice if you don't reach the warmth of the Balagan quickly. It's a race against thermodynamics. Back at the shelter, you pour the water into storage vessels positioned as close to the stove as safely possible. Some will be kept liquid for immediate use, but most will freeze. That's unavoidable. The key is having water available in a form that can be melted efficiently. Dmitri explains the hierarchy of water sources and their energy costs. Liquid water is best but requires constant fuel to maintain. Block ice, cut from the river or lake, is dense and melts efficiently. Hoarfrost and rime ice have too much air and require more energy to melt than the water you get from them. Emergency use only. Fresh snow is the worst, seemingly fluffy and full of water, but actually mostly air, requiring huge amounts of fuel to melt into disappointingly small amounts of water. Never eat snow for water, Dmitri warns, and it's clearly not the first time he's given this lecture. Your body must warm snow from -60 degrees Celsius to 37 degrees Celsius inside temperature. This takes massive energy, massive calories. Better to be thirsty than to eat snow, or you burn yourself out from inside. It's counterintuitive, you're surrounded by frozen water, but consuming it directly is dangerous. Everything here is a calculation. Energy expended versus energy gained, heat lost versus heat preserved. The afternoon is devoted to what Dmitri calls water housekeeping, and it's tedious but essential. You chip ice from the barrel, melt it in pots on the stove, pour the resulting water into drinking vessels, refill the pots with more ice, and repeat endlessly. The process is never finished. It's a continuous cycle that consumes firewood, time, and attention. Every cup of tea, every pot of soup, every splash of water to wash your face represents fuel burned and labor expended. There's a quirky survival technique Dmitri demonstrates that seems too strange to be real. He fills a leather water bladder halfway, seals it, and puts it inside his coat against his body. Your body heat keeps it liquid, he explains. When you travel far from camp, you carry water this way, but you must drink it within hours or it freezes anyway, and then you have ice against your body, which is very bad. It's an elegant solution, using your own metabolism as a thermos, but it requires constant vigilance and comes with risks if you miscalculate. You also learn about the different types of ice and their properties. Clear ice from the river is pure and melts cleanly. White ice contains air bubbles and sometimes impurities, usable but less ideal. Aufeis, or icing, forms when water seeps up through cracks and freezes in layers on top of existing ice. This can indicate flowing water beneath and is good for locating drilling spots. Permafrost ice, which has been frozen for thousands of years, is surprisingly pure but requires enormous energy to excavate and contains minerals that give water a strange taste. Dmitry also shows you the emergency water source that sounds almost mythical: breath collection. In extreme situations, when you have no fuel for melting ice and no access to liquid water, you can breathe into a container, letting your breath condense and freeze on the interior surfaces, then scraping out the ice crystals and melting them with body heat in your mouth. It's desperately inefficient. You might get a few teaspoons of water after an hour of effort, but it's better than nothing. He doesn't recommend it except as a last resort, the kind of technique you use when everything else has failed and you're choosing between maybe surviving and definitely dying. The psychological toll of water scarcity in a landscape made of frozen water is strange and wearing. You find yourself obsessing over every drop, mentally calculating whether you really need that cup of tea or if you can make do with less. You rinse cooking pots with minimal water, saving the rinse water for other purposes. You've stopped washing your face entirely. It's too cold to expose wet skin anyway, and the water is too precious. The cleanliness standards of the civilized world have no meaning here. Survival is what matters. As evening approaches, you've consumed perhaps a liter of liquid water total throughout the day, well below what you drink normally, and your body is showing signs of mild dehydration. Your lips are cracked, your skin feels dry and papery, your urine is darker than it should be. Dmitry notices and shakes his head. You must drink more, even when not thirsty. Cold makes you not feel thirst, but your body still needs water. Dehydration here kills many people. He pours you another cup of the bark tea, and you drink it dutifully though your body isn't sending thirst signals. The science behind Arctic dehydration is counterintuitive but well documented. The air at extreme cold temperatures contains almost no moisture. It's as dry as a desert, sometimes drier. Every breath you exhale carries moisture from your lungs, water that's lost from your system. Sweating, even the minimal amounts you can't avoid during physical work, depletes water. Your kidneys work harder in cold conditions, producing more urine as your body attempts to maintain core temperature by reducing blood volume to extremities, a process called cold diuresis. Add it all up, and you can become severely dehydrated without feeling thirsty, a dangerous combination. Before bed, you help Dmitry prepare the night water supply. Several pots of ice position to melt slowly near the stove, providing liquid water for the nighttime hours when tending the fire. A covered bucket of water, insulated with furs, that might stay liquid until morning. Small chunks of ice wrapped in cloth, positioned inside your sleeping furs where body heat will slowly melt them, providing emergency drinking water without getting out of bed. Every detail is calculated, every system designed to make the impossible slightly more possible. You lie in your sleeping furs that night, listening to ice crack and pop as it freezes, water bubbling in pots on the stove, wind howling outside. Your lips hurt from dryness, and you're still slightly thirsty despite drinking more than you wanted to. The irony weighs on you. You're living on top of what's essentially a frozen freshwater reservoir that extends hundreds of meters into the earth, surrounded by rivers and lakes of ice, beneath snow that blankets everything. Yet obtaining a simple drink of water requires tools, fuel, knowledge, and constant effort. Somewhere before sleep takes you, you understand something profound about human civilization. We think of ourselves as having transcended nature, as being independent of the environment. But that's only because we've created systems, infrastructure, technology, supply chains that hide the effort required to meet basic needs. Here in Yakutia, the illusion is stripped away. Water doesn't come from a tap. It comes from ice that must be found, extracted, transported, melted, and guarded against refreezing. Every sip is earned. Every drop is precious. And that's just water, the simplest, most abundant substance on Earth, and yet here, one of the most difficult to obtain. You fall asleep with a cup of tepid bark tea at your side, melting ice wrapped against your stomach inside your clothes, and the certain knowledge that tomorrow you'll wake and begin the cycle again. Find water, melt water, protect water, drink water, repeat until spring. You wake to the smell of something cooking, an actual, genuine food smell, not just bark tea or reheated dried fish. Your stomach, which has been quietly protesting the minimal rations of the past days, suddenly roars to life with hunger so intense it's almost painful. Dmitri is crouched by the stove, tending a pot that's producing steam and an aroma that's making your mouth water despite not knowing what's in it. "Today we hunt," he announces. "But first we eat real food. Need strength for what comes next." The pot contains what he calls winter soup, chunks of frozen reindeer meat that he's been saving, boiled with wild onions he harvested and dried last summer, fat rendered from bone marrow, and some kind of grain that looks like it might be barley. It's not complex cooking, but after days of dried fish and bark tea, it tastes like the finest restaurant meal you've ever had. The fat coats your mouth, providing calories your body desperately craves. The meat is tough and gamey, but it's protein and iron and energy. You eat 2 full bowls and would eat a third if Dmitri didn't stop you. "Too much after eating light makes you sick," he warns. "Also, this must last. We hunt today, but hunt might fail. Always assume you catch nothing, so you plan careful." It's the mentality of someone who understands that nature owes you nothing, that every meal might be your last full meal for days, that optimism without backup plans is just another way to die. The preparation for hunting in minus 67 degrees Celsius temperatures takes nearly 2 hours. Every piece of gear must be checked and double-checked. Dmitri examines the rifle, a bolt-action design that looks like it survived World War II and possibly World War I, with meticulous care. "Modern rifles, they freeze, they fail," he explains. "Oil gets thick, mechanisms stick. This old rifle, simple, less to break. We keep it cold always, never bring inside to warm. Temperature change makes condensation. Condensation makes ice in barrel, makes explosion when you fire." He keeps the rifle in an unheated exterior cache, a small structure where it stays the same temperature as the environment, preventing the thermal cycling that destroys equipment. Your clothing is inspected with equal care. Every seam, every closure, every potential gap where cold can enter. Dmitri adjusts your face mask, tightening it here, loosening it there, creating a balance between protection and the ability to actually see and breathe. He hands you pieces of dried fish to keep in your pockets. "If we are out long, if we get lost, if storm comes, you have food. Always carry food when you leave camp. Always." The hunting ground is 3 kilometers away, a distance that sounds trivial but takes over an hour to reach in deep cold and deeper snow. You're following a trail that's not really a trail, just a line of slightly compressed snow where people have walked before, maybe yesterday, maybe last week. Navigation here is more art than science. There are no landmarks in the conventional sense, just subtle variations in terrain that Dmitri reads like you'd read street signs. The way snow drifts around a particular rock formation, the pattern of frost on certain trees, the angle of the wind. The target is reindeer, semi-wild herds that range across this territory, hardy animals that have evolved to survive temperatures that would kill most mammals. The Saka people have a complex relationship with reindeer. They're not quite domesticated, not quite wild, existing in a middle space where humans and animals cooperate without one fully controlling the other. Some families own herds, others hunt wild populations, and there's significant overlap and debate about where one category ends and the other begins. Dmitri spots the tracks first. Deep impressions in the snow, relatively fresh, heading north toward a sheltered valley. Maybe 2 hours old, he judges, reading information from the snow that you can't even perceive. For animals, maybe 5, moving slow, feeding. You ask how he knows they were feeding rather than just traveling, and he points to areas where the snow is disturbed in a particular pattern, where the animals pawed through to reach lichen beneath. It's a language written in snow that you're only beginning to learn the alphabet of. The stalk requires patience that tests your limits. You move perhaps 50 meters, then wait completely still for 10 minutes. Move again, wait again. The cold during these waiting periods is extraordinary. When you're moving, your body generates heat, and you're almost comfortable. When you stop, the cold immediately begins to penetrate, finding every gap, every weakness. Your toes go numb first, then your fingers despite the layers of gloves and mittens. You flex and clench, trying to maintain circulation without making noise or movement that might spook the game. After nearly an hour of this excruciating stop-and-go approach, you see them. 5 reindeer, shaggy and frost-covered, pawing at snow in a small clearing. They're magnificent animals, far larger than you expected, with antlers that seem impossibly large for their bodies. Their breath creates clouds of vapor that hang in the still, cold air. They're perhaps 80 meters away, an easy shot for a skilled hunter, a challenging shot for someone whose hands are shaking from cold and whose heart is pounding from exhaustion and adrenaline. Dmitri settles into a shooting position, bracing the rifle against a fallen log. You expect him to shoot immediately, but he waits, watching. "The older female there," he whispers eventually, indicating one of the larger animals. "Not the biggest, not the smallest. That one the herd can lose without problem. We take what we need, not what we want." It's a distinction that seems subtle but contains volumes about sustainable hunting, about understanding population dynamics, about taking responsibility for the consequences of killing. The shot, when it comes, is shockingly loud in the frozen silence. The crack echoes across the landscape, and the reindeer scatter immediately, bounding through the deep snow with surprising speed and grace. Except for one which staggers, takes 3 more steps, and collapses. The other 4 vanish into the forest within seconds, their forms swallowed by the trees and the perpetual twilight. Dmitri approaches the downed animal carefully, rifle ready in case a finishing shot is needed. But it's not. The animal is dead, killed quickly and cleanly. You feel a complex swirl of emotions. Relief that you'll have food, sadness for the animal, respect for Dmitri's skill, and a strange primal satisfaction that you've participated in the oldest human activity, acquiring food directly from the wild. "Good death," Dmitri says quietly, kneeling beside the carcass. "Quick, no suffering. We thank the animal, we use everything, we waste nothing." The work of field dressing a reindeer in -67 degrees Celsius is surreal and difficult. Dmitri produces a knife and begins the process, and immediately you're struck by something bizarre. Steam rises from the animal's body cavity, where the internal temperature is still perhaps 38 degrees Celsius. The difference between the animal's core temperature and the ambient air is over 100 degrees, and the physics of that differential creates an almost otherworldly scene. Clouds of vapor pouring from the carcass like it's a portal to a warmer world. "We must work fast," Dmitri says, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Blood freezes quick, makes cutting hard. Meat freezes, tools stick." He's right. Already, the exposed flesh is beginning to frost over, taking on a crystalline sheen. You help where you can, mostly holding things and following instructions, your hands quickly becoming slick with blood that's trying to freeze on contact with your gloves. There's a quirky traditional practice that Dmitri insists on, extracting and immediately consuming a piece of the liver, still warm from the animal's body. "Vitamins, minerals, energy," he explains, cutting a slice and offering it to you. "Frozen liver is good, but fresh liver, still warm, this is best." You're hesitant, but you're also hungry, cold, and curious. The taste is stronger than cooked liver, almost metallic, rich, and somewhat overwhelming. But there's something about eating it there, in the cold steam still rising from the animal. It feels ancient and right in a way that's difficult to articulate. Historians have documented that Arctic peoples have long valued organ meats, particularly liver, for their concentrated nutrients. What's still debated is whether traditional consumption patterns led to vitamin A toxicity. Polar bear liver, for instance, contains dangerous levels, or if cultural knowledge included careful management of which organs to eat and in what quantities. The Saka seem to have figured this out. Reindeer liver is safe and nutritious, consumed fresh when possible, frozen for storage otherwise. The butchering reveals layers of fat, thick, white fat that's insulation for the animal but calories for you. Dmitri carefully separates the fat from the meat, wrapping it separately in cloth he's brought for this purpose. "Fat is gold," he says seriously. "More valuable than meat sometimes. Burns clean in lamps, waterproofs boots, gives energy, cooks food. We save every bit. In extreme cold, dietary fat isn't just desirable, it's essential. Your body needs it to generate heat, to maintain cell membranes that stay flexible in cold, to absorb fat-soluble vitamins that prevent deficiency diseases. By the time the animal is fully processed, your hands are cramping from the cold and the repetitive cutting motions. The meat, already frozen into solid chunks, is loaded into packs and onto the sled. The hide, scraped clean of excess tissue, is rolled and tied. The organs, heart, kidneys, stomach, are kept separate. The bones will be brought back for marrow and for making tools and needles. The antlers will be used for various implements. Dimitri's declaration that we waste nothing is not idealism. It's practical necessity. In an environment this harsh, every resource has value, and wastefulness is a form of suicide. The journey back to the Balagan is brutal. You're carrying at least 15 kilos of meat and supplies, and after the long stalk and the cold hours of butchering, you're exhausted. Your body is running on fumes, burning through its reserves of energy just to maintain temperature. Dimitri moves steadily, not fast but not stopping either, and you force yourself to keep pace. Stopping means cooling down, and cooling down means potentially not being able to start again. By the time you reach the shelter, darkness has fallen. That complete, absolute darkness of Arctic winter night that seems to have physical weight. You collapse inside, too tired even to remove your outer layers immediately. Dimitri, somehow still functional, gets the fire built up and starts a large pot of water melting. Now we eat real food, he says with satisfaction, cutting chunks of the fresh meat and adding them to the pot along with fat and some of his precious dried vegetables. The meat cooks slowly, and the smell that fills the Balagan is intoxicating. Your body, depleted from the day's exertion and the constant battle against cold, is screaming for calories, for protein, for fat. When Dimitri finally pronounces the stew ready and ladles out portions, you eat with single-minded focus, barely tasting the food, just consuming it as fuel. First bowl, second bowl, third bowl, Dimitri doesn't stop you this time. You've earned these calories. Later, fed and warming, you help Dimitri begin the process of preserving the meat. Some pieces are hung from the ceiling in the coldest part of the Balagan, where they'll freeze solid and stay preserved through winter. Other pieces are cut into thin strips for smoking and drying. The fat is rendered in a pot, melted down into liquid that will solidify into white blocks when cooled. Nothing is wasted, even the scraps too small for anything else go into soup stock. There's something deeply satisfying about this, about knowing exactly where your food came from, about having participated in every step from the hunt to the preservation. In civilization, meat comes in plastic-wrapped packages, sanitized and distant from the animal it once was. Here, you've looked the animal in the eyes, metaphorically, since it was already dead when you reached it. You've felt its warmth fade. You've cut its flesh and separated its parts. It's more honest, somehow. More real. As you prepare for sleep, your belly full for the first time in days, you think about the economics of food in this frozen land. That single reindeer represents perhaps 30 kilograms of edible meat and fat, maybe more. That's potentially 2 months of food for one person, if rationed carefully and supplemented with other sources. But obtaining it required a rifle, ammunition, knowledge of animal behavior, tracking skills, butchering expertise, and luck. You could have stalked for hours and found nothing. Some hunts fail. Some days you go hungry. The reindeer doesn't owe you its life, and the land doesn't owe you food. You fall asleep to the sound of fat rendering on the stove, meat hanging and dripping slightly as it freezes, the wind outside, and the deep satisfaction of having participated in the ancient human endeavor of feeding yourself directly from the wild. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but tonight you have meat, you have fat, you have food. In Yakutia in winter, that's wealth beyond measure. You wake from a nightmare you can't quite remember, your heart pounding, disoriented in the darkness. For a moment, you don't know where you are. The absolute blackness is so complete it feels like you've gone blind. Your hand fumbles for something, anything familiar, and finds only the rough fur of your sleeping bag. Panic rises in your throat before you hear Dimitri's steady breathing across the Balagan and the crackle of the fire. Reality reassembles itself. You're in Yakutia, it's the middle of winter, and the sun won't rise for hours yet. Except ours is optimistic. Even when the sun does appear, it will barely crest the horizon before sinking again, providing maybe 3 hours of weak, twilight-quality light before the darkness reclaims everything. This is your 8th day in the deep cold, and you're beginning to understand that the physical challenges, the cold itself, the struggle for water, the hunt for food, are only part of the equation. The other part, the part that creeps up on you slowly and insidiously, is what happens inside your head when you live in a place where darkness is the default state, where silence is so profound you can hear your own heartbeat, where the human mind, evolved for social interaction and sensory stimulation, begins to fray at the edges. Dimitri notices you're awake and stokes the fire, adding light as well as warmth to the space. Bad dreams? He asks, not looking at you directly. There's a courtesy in not forcing eye contact when someone is vulnerable. You nod, though you're not sure he can see it. Winter mind, he says simply, as if that explains everything. And maybe it does. Over breakfast, reheated reindeer stew and the ubiquitous bark tea, Dimitri talks about what he calls the darkness disease, what outsiders might call seasonal affective disorder or polar madness. In December, January, the sun is gone, he explains. Even at midday, just a little light, like candle in big room. People's minds get strange. Some get sad, cry for no reason. Some get angry, fight about nothing. Some get quiet, too quiet, stop talking, stop caring. Very dangerous. He tells you about a Russian researcher who came to study Yakutia 20 years ago, a scientist prepared for the cold but not for the darkness and isolation. After 6 weeks, he started talking to people who weren't there, Dimitri recounts. Conversations with his mother, who was dead 10 years. His colleagues found him outside his cabin, walking in circles in the snow, arguing with empty air. They had to evacuate him. The story is told matter-of-factly, without judgment. Simply what this place can do to unprepared minds. The psychological toll of Arctic winter is well documented by historians and psychologists, though the mechanisms are still being understood. The lack of sunlight disrupts circadian rhythms and suppresses serotonin production, leading to depression. The extreme isolation in traditional Saka culture, winter camps might be separated by dozens of kilometers with no contact for months, removes the social interaction that humans need for mental health. The monotony of the landscape and the daily routine creates a kind of sensory deprivation. And the constant vigilance required for survival creates a stress load that's exhausting in ways that physical labor never is. The old people knew this, Dimitri continues. They had ways to fight winter mind. Stories, always stories. Songs, games, work that keeps hands and mind busy. Never sit and do nothing. That's when bad thoughts come. He's describing what modern psychology would call behavioral activation and cognitive engagement, therapeutic techniques for managing depression, except the Saka figured this out centuries ago through observation and necessity. Today's task, Dimitri announces, is making something useful. You're going to construct fishing equipment for ice fishing, a project that will keep you occupied and productive. Ice fishing in Yakutia isn't recreational. It's a critical food source, one of the few ways to obtain protein and fat during the darkest months when hunting is nearly impossible and stored food supplies dwindle. The work is intricate and demanding. You're carving hooks from bone fragments, filing and shaping them with patient precision. You're braiding line from thin strips of sinew, creating a cord that's both strong and flexible. You're constructing a simple reel mechanism from wood and leather. Every step requires attention and focus, and you begin to understand Dimitri's strategy. The work keeps your hands busy and your mind occupied, leaving less space for the darkness to creep in. As you work, Dimitri talks, filling the silence with stories. He tells you about his grandfather, who survived the Soviet collectivization of the 1930s, when traditional Saka life was forcibly transformed and many people died from famine and cold when their traditional survival strategies were disrupted. He tells you about hunting trips where everything went wrong. Lost in blizzards, rifle jams at critical moments, falls through thin ice, and the lessons learned from surviving mistakes. He tells you absurd stories about tourists who came to Yakutia completely unprepared, like the German photographer who brought expensive Arctic gear rated to -40 degrees Celsius and nearly died when the temperature dropped to -65 degrees Celsius and his equipment failed catastrophically. There's a rhythm to the storytelling, a cadence that's almost hypnotic. You realize this is another survival skill, the ability to create social connection and entertainment from nothing but voice and memory. In a world without television, internet, books, or even much light to read by, oral culture becomes essential infrastructure. Stories are how knowledge transfers, how people stay connected, how minds stay engaged when the world outside is frozen darkness. Around midday, though day is a generous term for the pale twilight that passes for sunlight, you take a break and venture outside. The landscape is otherworldly in this light. Deep blues and purples, shadows that seem to have substance, the snow taking on an almost luminescent quality. It's beautiful in an alien, hostile way. You stand there for perhaps 5 minutes just looking, trying to absorb it, and you notice something strange happening in your perception. The silence is so complete that you begin to hear things that aren't there. A distant voice, perhaps, or music, or the sound of traffic. Your brain, desperate for sensory input, is manufacturing sounds to fill the void. It's unnerving, and you mention it to Dmitri when you return inside. He nods knowingly. The silence speaks, he says. You hear it, yes? This is normal. This is why we talk, make noise, sing. Silence for too long makes the mind invent sounds, and then you can't tell what's real and what's not. Scholars still debate the extent to which sensory deprivation in Arctic environments contributed to traditional cultural practices like throat singing, drumming, and elaborate storytelling traditions. Some argue these were adaptations specifically to combat psychological isolation, while others contend they arose from the same creative impulses that drive art everywhere. The truth is probably both. Art is universal, but in extreme environments it becomes survival technology. The afternoon brings an unexpected visitor. A Saka woman from a neighboring camp, traveling with 2 dogs and a sled. Her arrival is shocking in its ordinariness. You've become so isolated that seeing another human feels almost supernatural. She and Dmitri speak in Saka, a Turkic language that sounds nothing like Russian, their words rapid and fluid. She's brought news. Another family's child is sick, possibly pneumonia, and they're debating whether to attempt the dangerous journey to the nearest clinic, over 80 kilometers away, or wait for the traveling doctor who might come in a few weeks. The conversation is a stark reminder that isolation here isn't metaphorical. It's literal and potentially deadly. Medical emergencies, minor in cities, become life-threatening calculations of risk versus benefit. The woman also brings social news: who's getting married, who's had disagreements, the small dramas of a scattered community trying to maintain cohesion across vast distances. Before she leaves, she shares tea and dried fish with you, and the simple act of socializing with someone new feels like oxygen to a drowning person. You didn't realize how much you needed it until it was happening. After she departs, the Balagan feels emptier and quieter than before. Dmitri notices your mood shifting and responds by suggesting a project. You're going to construct a traditional Saka game called Habulet, essentially carved wooden dice used for gambling and entertainment. The carving is meditative, requiring concentration but not intense cognitive effort, the perfect activity for a mind that needs occupation without exhaustion. As you carve, Dmitri talks about the psychological survival strategies his people developed over centuries. In winter camp, you must have routine, he explains. Wake same time, eat same time, sleep same time. No routine, time becomes strange. You lose track, your mind gets confused. He's describing the importance of circadian rhythm maintenance, though he wouldn't use those terms. You must have projects, things to make, things to repair. Idle hands invite dark thoughts. He also talks about the importance of light, even artificial light. The Saka traditionally kept lamps burning constantly through winter, not just for illumination, but for psychological health. The small flame, flickering and alive, provided a focal point, something dynamic in an otherwise static world. Modern research has confirmed this intuition. Even small amounts of light can help maintain mental health in low-light environments. There's a quirky traditional practice Dmitri mentions that seems almost magical. The Saka would sometimes construct small snow sculptures near their winter camps. Simple forms, nothing elaborate, just to have something new to look at, some variation in the endlessly white landscape. Modern art therapy independently discovered the mental health benefits of creative expression, but the Saka knew it centuries ago. Making things, even small and impermanent things, helps maintain sanity. As evening approaches and darkness becomes complete again, you notice something happening to your perception of time. Has it been 3 hours since the visitor left, or 5? Was breakfast this morning or yesterday morning? The days are beginning to blur together, each nearly identical to the last. Wake, tend fire, eat, work on some project, eat, sleep, repeat. Without the sun's rising and setting to mark time, without varied activities or social interactions, Your brain struggles to create distinct memories, and time becomes fluid and uncertain. Dmitri sees you checking the small calendar he keeps, counting days, trying to orient yourself. You feel it, yes? He asks. Time sickness. Days blend together. You forget what day it is, how long you've been here. Some people, they lose whole weeks, can't remember, can't distinguish one day from next. It's not dementia or memory loss in the clinical sense. It's the natural result of living in an environment without temporal landmarks, where every day is dark and cold and structurally identical to every other day. That night, lying in your furs, you find yourself fighting off a wave of despair that seems to come from nowhere. You're fed, you're warm, you're safe. Objectively, things are fine. But subjectively, you feel a crushing weight of loneliness, of meaninglessness, of being swallowed by the darkness and the cold and the endless winter that has weeks or months left to run. Tears leak from your eyes, and you're not even sure why you're crying. It's just the darkness, pressing in, finding the cracks in your psychological armor. Dmitri's voice comes from across the balagan, quiet but firm. The darkness lies, he says. It tells you nothing matters. Nothing will get better. Winter lasts forever. This is lie. Spring always comes. Always. You must believe this, even when you can't see it, even when it feels impossible. Spring always comes. It's not poetry. It's not particularly eloquent, but it's exactly what you need to hear. A voice in the darkness, reminding you that this isn't forever, that survival is possible, that you're not alone. You fall asleep eventually, exhausted from emotions you can't fully explain, and in your dreams you're walking through endless winter landscapes, looking for something you can't name, while voices whisper in languages you don't understand. It's not peaceful sleep, but it's sleep, and in Yakutia in winter, that's sometimes the best you can hope for. You wake to find Dmitri preparing something unusual. He's laying out clothing in a specific order, checking each piece with ritualistic care. Not the everyday furs and layers you've been wearing, but older garments, some that look handmade with techniques you haven't seen before. Today you learn real Saka way, he announces. City clothes, modern clothes, they work but barely. Old way, traditional way. This keeps you alive when everything else fails. The first lesson is about reindeer fur, and it's far more complex than you imagined. Dmitri holds up two pieces of hide that look nearly identical to your untrained eye. This one autumn fur, he says, indicating the first. This one winter fur. See difference. You squint, looking closer, and gradually you perceive it. The winter fur has individual hairs that are noticeably thicker, and when you compress the fur, it springs back more readily. Winter reindeer fur. Each hair is hollow, Dmitri explains. Like tiny straw, traps air, makes incredible insulation. Autumn fur hairs are solid. Still warm, but not same. He shows you a traditional Saka coat called a sock, constructed from winter reindeer hide with the fur facing inward against your body. Over this goes another layer, fur facing outward. The genius is in the layering. The inner layer traps your body heat with those hollow hairs, while the outer layer creates a shell that sheds wind and snow. Between the two layers, there's a thin separation of air that acts as additional insulation. Modern parkas try to copy this. Dmitri notes with some amusement. Down jackets, synthetic insulation, all trying to do what reindeer already does perfect. The construction details are fascinating and speak to centuries of refinement. The seams are sewn with sinew thread using a specific stitch that Dmitri demonstrates, overlapping rather than butting edges together, creating a double thickness at every seam that eliminates weak points where cold could penetrate. The sleeves are cut slightly longer than necessary and have interior cuffs that cinch tight, preventing warm air from escaping and cold air from entering. There are no zippers, no buttons, just leather ties that can be operated with heavily mittened hands and won't break in extreme cold the way modern fasteners do. For your legs, Dmitri produces traditional nat-esque pants made from reindeer leg fur, where the hair grows in a specific direction that naturally sheds snow and moisture. You notice fur pattern? He asks, and you do. The hairs all angle downward, creating a shingled effect. Water runs down. Snow slides off, never soaks in. Modern waterproof fabrics try to do this, but they trap moisture from inside your sweat. This fur, it breathes, lets moisture escape, but water can't come in from outside. The footwear is perhaps the most critical element. Dmitry shows you how to construct proper winter boots, the turbas, starting with an inner booty of soft reindeer fur that fits your foot like a glove. Over this goes a layer of dried grass, compressed to create insulation. Then an outer boot of treated hide, sewn with the same overlapping seam technique, completely waterproof. The soles are multiple layers of hide compressed and sewn together, thick enough to insulate from the frozen ground but flexible enough to actually walk in. City people, they think thick sole is warm, Dmitry says, showing you a commercial winter boot for comparison. But thick sole is stiff, you can't feel ground, you slip, you fall, you break bones. Traditional sole, thin enough to feel, thick enough to protect, and we add grass insulation inside for warmth. He's right, when you try walking in the traditional boots, you have far better ground sense than in modern boots, able to feel variations in terrain and adjust your balance accordingly. There's a crucial technique for managing foot moisture that seems almost obsessive but is actually life-saving. Every few hours, you must remove your boots, change the inner grass insulation, and replace it with dry grass carried in a pouch. The used grass is tucked inside your outer clothing where body heat will dry it for reuse. Wet feet in Yakutia means dead feet, Dmitry states flatly. Frostbite, then gangrene, then death. Traditional people, they change grass 3, 4, 5 times per day. Never let feet stay wet. Modern moisture-wicking fabrics attempt the same goal, but require washing and drying facilities that don't exist in winter camps. Grass is renewable, disposable, and works perfectly. Hand protection follows similar principles. The traditional billeri, mittens, are constructed in multiple layers. Inner gloves of soft fur, outer mittens of wind-resistant hide, and a final shell that can be removed if you need dexterity for detailed work. The mittens are connected by a leather cord that runs through your sleeves and across your back, like children's mittens, which seems silly until Dmitry explains. You remove mittens to work, they hang on cord, can't drop them, can't lose them. Lose mittens in Yakutia. You lose hands, then you lose life. Face protection is equally sophisticated. The traditional bashliuk, hood and face mask combination, is constructed from multiple pieces of fur sewn together with specific attention to airflow. There are breathing holes positioned precisely where your nose and mouth sit, lined with additional fur that pre-warms the air you breathe while allowing moisture from your breath to escape rather than freezing inside the mask. Modern face masks, they freeze from your breath, Dmitry notes, showing you a balaclava crusted with ice from previous use. Traditional mask, designed for this, moisture escapes but warmth stays. Historians have documented the incredible sophistication of indigenous Arctic clothing, with some researchers arguing that traditional fur garments remain superior to modern technical fabrics in extreme cold conditions. What scholars still debate is how much of this knowledge has been preserved accurately versus romanticized or reconstructed. Much traditional knowledge was suppressed during Soviet-era collectivization, and some modern, traditional practices may actually be recent innovations based on partial memory and new materials. Dmitry shares a survival technique that sounds bizarre but is apparently proven effective. Breath management while wearing fur clothing. You never breathe directly into your coat, he instructs. Moisture from breath freezes in fur, ruins insulation. Always turn head, breathe to side, or breathe through special hole in face mask. Some old people, they could sleep in deep cold and never fog their furs, never create ice. This is skill learned over many winters. There's also the matter of layering sequence, which follows specific rules that Dmitry insists on. Base layer must be thin and able to transport moisture away from skin. Traditionally soft rabbit fur or bird skins, amazingly enough. Middle layers are for insulation, reindeer fur, thick and air trapping. Outer layer is for wind resistance and moisture shedding, treated hide or specific types of fur. You reverse this order, you die, Dmitry says with characteristic bluntness. Insulation outside, wind resistance inside, doesn't work. Airflow wrong, moisture trapped, everything fails. The traditional clothing also includes clever features you wouldn't notice unless pointed out. Small fur patches sewn at specific friction points. Underarms, inner thighs, where the rifle rests against your shoulder, providing extra durability where wear is greatest. Hidden pockets sewn into seams, sized perfectly for carrying dried meat, fire-starting materials, or small tools. Ventilation systems that can be opened or closed by adjusting ties, allowing you to dump heat when working hard or seal everything when stationary. Dmitry produces a garment that looks almost comical, a sleeping coat called doha, essentially a fur sleeping bag with arms. For winter travel, for sleeping outside, this is essential, he explains. You wear this over everything, climb inside, tie closed, and you can survive night even without fire if necessary. The garment is enormous, clearly designed to fit over multiple layers of clothing, with an attached hood and even fur coverings for your hands and feet. It's like a personal portable shelter. There's a quirky practice involving animal intestines that Dmitry mentions somewhat apologetically. Traditional Saka sometimes made waterproof outer garments from processed seal or walrus intestines, creating translucent, flexible, completely waterproof layers. Not common here, more from coastal peoples, he notes. But some families traded for these intestine parkas, used them for fishing, for wet snow conditions. Modern raincoats copy same idea, waterproof but breathable, but intestines did it first hundreds of years ago. The afternoon is spent practicing with this traditional gear, learning to walk in the boots without stumbling, managing the multiple layers of hand protection, adjusting face masks and hoods for different conditions. It's exhausting and humbling. This isn't just clothing. It's a technology refined over thousands of years, with every detail serving multiple purposes. The modern tendency is to make clothing that's specialized, one jacket for skiing, another for hiking, another for extreme cold. Traditional Saka clothing is multi-purpose, reparable with available materials, and designed to be functional across a range of conditions. Dmitry also teaches you how to repair these garments using bone needles and sinew thread. The stitching technique is specific and demanding. You're essentially creating waterproof seams using nothing but animal products and skill. Factory-made clothes, they tear, you need new clothes, Dmitry observes. Traditional clothes, they wear out, you repair them, they last longer than you do. My grandfather's coat, I still have it, still use it sometimes. 70 years old, still works perfect. As evening approaches and you're dressed fully in traditional gear, Dmitry suggests a test. You're going to spend an hour outside in the deep cold, relatively stationary, to experience how well this clothing actually works. It's not a pleasant prospect, but it's instructive. You position yourself in a somewhat sheltered spot and simply stand, occasionally shifting weight, breathing carefully, monitoring your body's response. The difference is remarkable. In modern clothing, you'd be dangerously cold within 20 minutes. In the traditional gear, properly layered and managed, you're uncomfortable but survivable. Your extremities stay warm, your core stays warm, and most surprisingly, you're not generating the condensation and moisture buildup that plagues modern clothing in extreme cold. The fur breathes in ways that synthetic fabrics simply can't replicate. By the time you return inside, you're cold but not hypothermic, and more importantly, your clothing is still dry and functional. Dmitry helps you remove the layers in proper sequence, checking each piece for ice buildup or moisture. There's minimal frosting, and what ice has formed is on the outermost layer where it can be brushed off easily. This is how Saka lived for thousands of years, Dmitry says with quiet pride. Not in heated houses, not with modern technology. Just knowledge, fur, and understanding of how to work with cold instead of fighting it. That night, lying in your regular sleeping furs but with new appreciation for traditional knowledge, you think about the relationship between technology and survival. Modern society assumes that newer is better, that synthetic materials and advanced manufacturing have surpassed anything primitive peoples could create. But here, in the most extreme inhabited environment on Earth, traditional technology holds its own or exceeds modern equivalents in critical ways. The difference is that traditional gear requires knowledge to use properly. You can't just buy it and expect it to work. You must learn the techniques, understand the principles, maintain and repair it yourself. You fall asleep warm and dry, dressed in furs that are virtually identical to what people wore here 1,000 years ago, and there's something profound and humbling about that continuity. The knowledge passing from generation to generation, refined and perfected, representing the accumulated wisdom of countless people learning, through trial and error and sometimes death, How to survive where survival should be impossible. You wake to an alien sound, a mechanical hum that seems completely out of place in this ancient frozen landscape. For a disoriented moment, you think you've been rescued, that modern civilization has arrived with heated vehicles and instant coffee. Then you recognize the sound. Dimitri's portable generator, a battered Soviet-era machine that looks like it survived several wars and possibly an avalanche. He's setting up what appears to be a small satellite phone, the kind expedition teams use in extreme environments. Weather forecast, he explains, noticing your confusion. Also, I check on family in village, make sure no emergencies. It's a jarring reminder that you're not actually living in the 18th century. This is modern Yakutia, where ancient survival techniques coexist with technology, where people live in essentially traditional conditions but with strategic access to contemporary tools. The question is, which technology actually works when the temperature hits minus 70 degrees Celsius? The satellite phone powers up slowly, its screen flickering in the cold. Dimitri holds it carefully, and you notice he's kept it inside his coat, against his body until the moment of use. Batteries die in minutes in this cold, he explains. Lithium batteries especially, below minus 40 degrees Celsius, they stop working, just die completely. So you keep everything warm, use it quick, put it back before it freezes. He makes his calls rapidly, speaking in terse Saka, then powers down and tucks the phone back inside his layers. The generator itself is a masterclass in cold weather engineering, or rather, in the failure of modern engineering. Dimitri shows you the modifications he's made. The oil has been replaced with a special synthetic blend that doesn't thicken in extreme cold. The fuel is mixed with additives to prevent gelling. The carburetor has been retrofitted with heating elements. The pull start has been modified with a longer cord and larger handle to accommodate mittened hands. Modern generator, it says Arctic rated, says good to minus 40 degrees Celsius. Dimitri says with a snort, marketing lies. Nothing modern works at real Yakutia cold without modification. Your education continues with a demonstration of various technologies and their cold weather failures. Dimitri produces a standard smartphone, a relatively recent model from a major manufacturer, and powers it on outside. Within 60 seconds, the battery indicator drops from full to critical. Within 2 minutes, the phone shuts down completely, despite being fully charged. Same with tablets, laptops, cameras, anything with lithium battery, Dimitri notes. People come here with expensive equipment, it all fails in minutes. Then they have nothing. He shows you his solution, a combination of old and new. He carries a simple button-press phone, a model that uses older nickel-metal hydride batteries that tolerate cold better. Even this, he keeps in an insulated pouch against his body. For photographs, he still uses a mechanical film camera, a robust Soviet-era model with no electronics, no batteries, just springs and levers that work in any temperature. Digital cameras freeze, LCD screens stop working, batteries die, he explains. This camera, it's 60 years old, still perfect. There's something darkly humorous about watching the failure of modern technology in extreme cold. Dimitri demonstrates with various items. A GPS unit that claims full cold weather operation, but whose screen becomes sluggish and unreadable below minus 50 degrees Celsius. A battery-powered headlamp that provides strong light for perhaps 10 minutes before dimming to uselessness. A portable radio that works fine until you step outside, then produces only static as the cold affects its circuitry. Historians have noted the irony that indigenous Arctic peoples, once considered technologically primitive by European explorers, actually possessed technology better suited to their environment than the industrial equipment the explorers brought. What's still debated is whether modern technology has actually improved life in extreme Arctic conditions or if it's created new dependencies and vulnerabilities. If the satellite phone fails, for instance, and you've lost the traditional signaling methods, you might be worse off than before. Dimitri's approach is pragmatic. Use modern technology where it genuinely helps, but never depend on it and always have traditional backups. He shows you his navigation system, a GPS unit for when it works, but also a detailed mental map of the territory, knowledge of celestial navigation, and the ability to read landscape features for orientation. GPS is convenient, he acknowledges, but convenience is not survival. GPS fails, I still know where I am. Young people now, they follow GPS everywhere, no map knowledge. GPS breaks, they are lost immediately. Very dangerous. The fuel situation provides another lesson in modern technology's limitations. The generator runs on gasoline, which must be specially treated to remain liquid and combustible in extreme cold. Regular gasoline will gel and become unpumpable below about -40 degrees Celsius. Diesel, which many modern vehicles use, is even worse. It can gel at -20 degrees Celsius without additives. The old Soviet trucks that operate in Yakutia use special Arctic diesel, heavily treated with anti-gel additives. And even then, drivers often keep engines running 24/7 in deep cold because restarting a cold-soaked engine is nearly impossible. I show you something interesting, Dmitry says, leading you to where he keeps a small motorcycle, a rugged Soviet-era model. In summer, he uses it for traveling to the village. In winter, it's completely useless. The tires become brittle and shatter-prone. The metal contracts and becomes so cold that touching it causes instant frostbite. The chain and cables freeze solid. Modern motorcycles, even worse, he notes. Electronics, fuel injection, all fails. This old one, at least it's simple. In spring, I check everything, replace what broke, it works again. The vehicle situation in Yakutia is almost surreal. Car tires, at extreme cold, lose their flexibility and can shatter like glass if you hit a bump. Metal becomes brittle, tools can snap, structural components can fracture. Engine blocks can crack if antifreeze isn't properly formulated. Windshield wiper fluid freezes solid unless it's nearly pure alcohol. Even the rubber gaskets and seals become hard and lose their ability to seal properly, causing air leaks, fluid leaks, and eventual failure. Dmitry shares stories of modern vehicles failing catastrophically. The Japanese SUV that arrived in Oymyakon in winter and had its automatic transmission freeze solid because the fluid wasn't rated for extreme cold. It had to be towed out, a several-day operation costing thousands of dollars. The electric car that someone tried to test in Yakutia, it went perhaps 15 kilometers before the battery died completely, and the vehicle had to be abandoned until spring. The satellite internet system that promised global coverage, but whose antenna froze and cracked in the cold, rendering it useless. There are quirky Soviet-era solutions that still work better than modern equivalents. Dmitry shows you a portable kerosene heater, simple, robust, with no electronics. It provides heat reliably, runs on fuel that doesn't gel in cold, and can be repaired with basic tools. Modern propane heaters, by contrast, struggle in extreme cold as propane doesn't vaporize well below -40 degrees Celsius. Battery-powered electric heaters are useless. They drain their batteries in minutes trying to fight the cold. The communication technology is particularly interesting. Dmitry has a shortwave radio, another Soviet relic, that operates on replaceable batteries he keeps warm. In emergencies, this provides communication over hundreds of kilometers without relying on satellites or cellular towers. Cell phones, they need towers, towers need power, he explains. Big storm, power fails, towers fail. Cell phones are just expensive paperweights. This radio, I can talk to village, to city, to rescue services, always works. Even lighting technology has its hierarchy of reliability. Modern LED flashlights are efficient and bright, but their electronics fail in deep cold and batteries die rapidly. Older incandescent flashlights work better, less efficient, but the heat they produce helps keep the batteries functional. Best of all, Dmitry demonstrates are simple candles and oil lamps. Fire never fails, he says simply. Batteries fail, electronics fail, but fire is fire. This is why traditional people used oil lamps, candles, not because they didn't know better, but because these actually work. You spend the afternoon experimenting with various pieces of equipment, documenting their failure points. A digital watch stops updating below -60 degrees Celsius, its display freezing mid-second. A modern butane lighter refuses to spark, the fuel too cold to vaporize. A battery-powered drill's batteries die almost instantly. A portable solar panel, theoretically useful for recharging devices, produces almost no power because the weak winter sun barely rises above the horizon and the panel's efficiency drops dramatically in cold. The contrast with traditional technology is striking. A flint and steel fire starter works regardless of temperature. It's just physics and chemistry, no batteries required. A mechanical wind-up watch keeps time perfectly. Hand tools, saws, axes, knives, function normally if you understand that metal conducts cold, and you must handle them carefully to avoid frostbite. It's a humbling reminder that advanced doesn't always mean better suited to the environment. Dmitry also introduces you to hybrid approaches that combine old and new intelligently. He has a small solar panel, but he uses it only in spring and fall when there's actual sunlight. He has a battery bank, but he keeps it inside his coat and charges it from the generator rather than relying on solar in winter. He has digital maps on a device, but the device is a backup to his knowledge, not a replacement for it. There's a survival technique that seems almost paranoid but makes perfect sense. Dmitry keeps duplicates of critical items, and those duplicates are completely different technologies. He has a GPS and traditional navigation. He has a modern lighter and flint and steel. He has a satellite phone and a shortwave radio. He has LED lights and oil lamps. Modern things are convenient when they work, he explains. But they all work the same way: batteries, electronics, complexity. One principle fails, everything fails. Traditional things are simple, different principles, more reliable. As evening falls and you help Dmitry shut down and secure the generator, you reflect on the relationship between humans and technology. We create tools to extend our capabilities, to make life easier, to transcend our limitations. But every tool creates new dependencies, and in extreme environments, those dependencies can become lethal. The person who depends entirely on modern technology in Yakutia is vulnerable in ways that someone with traditional skills is not. That night, by lamplight rather than LED, you update notes with a mechanical pencil. Modern pens freeze and stop writing, but pencils work in any temperature. You're writing about the failure of advanced technology, using ancient writing implements, in a shelter designed with Bronze Age principles, staying alive through knowledge accumulated over thousands of years. The irony is rich and the lesson is clear. In the most extreme inhabited place on Earth, the cutting edge of technology sometimes looks remarkably like the past. You fall asleep to the faint smell of kerosene from the lamp, the crackle of wood fire, and the certain knowledge that if all your modern equipment failed tomorrow, if the generator died, the phone broke, the GPS fritzed out, you could still survive because the old ways still work, still matter, still represent wisdom that silicon and lithium cannot replace. You wake to something impossible: warmth. Not the marginal, hard-won warmth of the Balagan's fire, but actual, genuine warmth seeping through the walls. For a disoriented moment, you think you're hallucinating, that your mind has finally snapped from the endless cold and darkness. Then you hear it dripping, water dripping from the roof, from the ice formations on the walls, a sound you haven't heard in what feels like forever. You stumble outside, and the thermometer reads -28 degrees Celsius. After weeks at -60 degrees Celsius and below, -28 feels positively tropical. Spring is coming, Dmitry announces, though you note he says coming, not here. Spring in Yakutia doesn't arrive like it does in temperate climates. A gradual warming, flowers blooming, pleasant transition. Here, spring is a violent, chaotic event, a battle between winter's death grip and the returning sun, and it's still weeks or possibly months away. But this warming trend, this temporary reprieve from the deepest cold, is a preview, a promise that winter is not actually eternal, despite what your frost-damaged psyche has come to believe. The landscape is transforming in subtle ways. The sun, when it appears, now rises noticeably higher above the horizon, providing several hours of actual daylight rather than perpetual twilight. The quality of light is different too: sharper, brighter, carrying some memory of warmth even if the air temperature remains well below freezing. You stand outside longer than you have in weeks, face turned toward the sun, absorbing light that your body desperately needs after the long darkness. Dmitry uses this warming period to conduct an inventory and assessment. You're going through all your equipment, all your supplies, checking everything for damage, wear, or depletion. It's sobering to see the toll winter has taken. The rope you used for various tasks is brittle and frayed. The leather on your boots has dried and cracked in places despite your care. Your clothing shows wear at friction points, elbows, knees, underarms. The store of food has diminished significantly. What seemed like abundant supplies in early winter now look sparse and carefully rationed. Your own body has changed too. When you look at your hands, they're weathered beyond recognition. Nails split and ridged, skin tough and calloused, permanent brown staining from bark tannins that no amount of washing removes. Your face, glimpsed in a small mirror Dimitri produces, shows windburn scars, areas of frostbite damage that have healed but left marks. You've lost weight despite eating well. Your body has been burning enormous amounts of calories just maintaining temperature, and the physical labor of survival has stripped away any softness you arrived with. Mentally, the changes are harder to quantify but perhaps more profound. You notice that you're hypervigilant about temperature, constantly monitoring your extremities, checking for signs of frostbite, assessing whether you're too warm or too cold. You've developed an obsessive attention to fire, the state of the coals, when more would needs adding, ensuring it never fully dies. You've become intensely aware of water, how much you have, how much you need, where the next supply will come from. These aren't conscious decisions. They're reflexes now, survival instincts that winter has burned into your nervous system. The psychological weight of winter becomes more apparent now that you can see its end approaching. During the worst of it, you were in survival mode, no energy for reflection, just constant focus on immediate necessities. Now, with slightly easier conditions, you have mental space to process what you've been through, and emotions hit in delayed waves. There's pride in having survived, certainly, but also something like grief for the person you were before, softer, less capable, unaware of how thin the margin between life and death actually is. Dimitri seems to understand this without you explaining. Winter changes everyone, he says quietly, repairing a harness that's seen heavy use. People come here, they think they know themselves. Winter shows them who they actually are, strong or weak, clever or foolish, able to adapt or too rigid. You survived, which means you adapted. Many don't. He doesn't elaborate on what happened to those who didn't adapt, and you don't ask. The inventory reveals that you've consumed approximately 60% of the food supplies, 70% of the kerosene, and nearly all of the specialized cold weather fuel additives. The firewood pile has shrunk dramatically. You've been burning perhaps 20 kilograms per day just to maintain livable temperatures. The bark and roots you harvested are mostly gone. Your ammunition is down to a handful of rounds. In short, if winter were to continue for another month at full intensity, you'd be in serious trouble. This is the dangerous time, Dimitri warns, and you're confused. Isn't the worst over? People relax now, think they survived winter, stop being careful. But spring kills many people. Ice on rivers gets thin, people fall through. Avalanches from warming snow. People travel too far because weather is better, get caught in late storms. Also, bodies are weak from winter. Immune systems low, sickness comes. He lists these hazards matter-of-factly, not trying to scare you but ensuring you understand that survival requires vigilance until you're truly safe. You spend several days in a curious state of limbo, too warm for deep winter protocols, too cold for spring activities. The temperature oscillates wildly, minus 35 degrees Celsius at night, minus 15 degrees Celsius on sunny afternoons, creating freeze-thaw cycles that make everything messy and complicated. The snow develops a crust of ice that collapses when you step on it, making walking exhausting. Ice formations become unstable and dangerous. Everything is in transition, and transition is uncertainty. There's a quirky phenomenon Dimitri calls spring fever that affects both humans and animals. After months of darkness and cold, the returning light triggers behavioral changes, increased energy, restlessness, sometimes reckless decision-making. People do stupid things in early spring, he explains. Think they can travel like in summer, think the ice is still safe, think they don't need full winter gear anymore. We lose more people in March and April than in deepest winter, because winter makes people careful, but spring makes people careless. The wildlife is changing too. You see tracks in the snow that weren't there before. Small rodents emerging from hibernation, ptarmigan returning from wherever they spent the darkest months. Even signs of a fox hunting near the camp. The world is waking up, slowly and tentatively, testing whether it's safe to rejoin the living. There's something profound about witnessing this, the resilience of life, the way it retreats during impossible conditions and then returns when conditions improve. Historians have documented that indigenous Arctic peoples marked spring's arrival with celebrations and rituals, not just because of improved conditions, but because survival through another winter was genuinely uncertain and worthy of recognition. What scholars still debate is how much winter mortality occurred in traditional societies versus how these cultures have been romanticized. Some argue that Arctic peoples were well adapted and mortality was low, while others point to evidence of periodic famines and significant winter deaths, particularly among the young and elderly. You begin preparing for departure, though it's still weeks away. Equipment needs to be repaired or replaced. You practice skills you'll need: navigating in slushy conditions, identifying dangerous ice, managing clothing layers for variable temperatures. Dmitri insists on these preparations with characteristic seriousness. Spring travel is maybe more dangerous than winter travel, he repeats. At least in winter, everything is predictable. Ice is solid, snow is stable. In spring, everything is changing every day. River frozen solid yesterday, today has weak spots. Snow stable in morning, unstable by afternoon. One afternoon, you take a solo walk, something that would have been suicidal in deep winter but is now possible with proper precautions. You don't go far, perhaps a kilometer from camp, but it's the first time in months you've been alone with your thoughts in the landscape. The silence is still profound, but it's different now. Not oppressive but peaceful. The light, weak but present, transforms the endless white into shades of blue and gold. You can see the contours of the land, the subtle variations that were invisible in darkness. You sit on a fallen log, and for the first time since arriving, you're not focused on survival tasks, not monitoring for danger, not calculating fuel or food or water. You're just sitting, being present, and something inside you that's been clenched tight for months finally loosens. Tears come, and you're not entirely sure why: relief, exhaustion, gratitude, grief for who you were before, pride in who you've become. Maybe all of it. The cold wind dries the tears on your face, and you laugh at the absurdity of crying in one of the harshest environments on Earth. When you return to camp, Dmitri takes one look at you and nods knowingly. He doesn't ask what happened, doesn't press for explanation. He just hands you a cup of tea. Not the bark tea of survival necessity, but actual tea, probably saved for a special occasion. And you sit together in companionable silence, two people who've survived winter together, who've shared the intimate experience of keeping each other alive when the world wanted you dead. That night, you help Dmitri count supplies one final time and make plans for the journey back to civilization. The thermometer reads -25°C, practically balmy by recent standards. The fire burns with less urgency. You can let it burn lower now without risking death. The water in the barrel stays liquid longer. These small changes, which would be meaningless in any other context, here represent the difference between barely surviving and actually living. You fall asleep for the last time in the Balagan. Tomorrow you'll begin breaking camp, packing, preparing for departure. Your body aches in a dozen places. Your hands are scarred and weathered. Your face shows the marks of frostbite and windburn that may never fully fade. But you're alive. You survived Yakutia in winter, survived temperatures that kill unprepared people in minutes, survived darkness and isolation and the constant draining battle against cold. More than that, you've learned something profound about human resilience and vulnerability. We're fragile creatures, really soft-skinned, tropical animals who should have no business surviving in places like this. Yet here we are, and here people have been for thousands of years because we have something unique. The ability to accumulate knowledge, to learn from those who came before, to adapt our behavior and create tools and techniques that let us survive where we have no biological right to exist. The night is quiet except for the familiar sounds that have become your lullaby. Fire crackling, wind outside, ice popping and creaking as temperatures shift. You think about the journey ahead, about returning to civilization with its electricity and running water and central heating, luxuries you once took for granted and will never take for granted again. You think about how you'll explain this experience to people who've never been truly cold, never faced the real possibility of death from exposure, never had to boil bark just to stay warm from the inside. Mostly, though, you think about spring, still weeks away but coming, inevitably coming. Winter always ends. The cold always breaks. The sun always returns. It's a simple truth, a fact of astronomy and planetary physics. But when you're living through the darkest, coldest depths of winter, it's easy to forget. The darkness whispers that this is forever, that warmth is a myth, that survival is temporary and death is certain. But the darkness lies. Spring always comes. Your breathing slows, deepens, becomes rhythmic. The balagan is warm enough, the fire is steady, your body is fed and sheltered. Tomorrow brings new challenges, but tonight you're safe. Tonight, you've survived another day in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. Tonight, that's enough. The last thing you hear before sleep takes you is Dimitri adding wood to the fire, maintaining the warmth, keeping the darkness at bay. In the morning, the real work of departure begins. But for now, for these final hours, you rest in the knowledge that you made it through winter, battered, changed, marked by the experience, but alive. Spring is coming, and you'll be there to see it. And now, dear listener, as our journey through the frozen wastes of Yakutia draws to a close, let yourself settle deeper into your blankets. Feel the warmth around you, the soft comfort of your bed, the gentle darkness of your room. So different from that harsh, crystalline darkness of the Arctic winter. You've walked through ice and cold alongside someone who survived, who learned, who transformed. But now it's time to let those images soften and fade, like frost melting in the first week rays of spring sun. Your breathing is slowing, natural, and easy, each breath carrying away a little more tension, a little more wakefulness. The survival lessons dissolve into dream fragments, flickering fires, the whisper of falling snow, the warmth of shared tea in the coldest place on Earth. You survived that journey in your mind, and now you're safe, warm, ready to drift into peaceful sleep. Let your thoughts become like snowflakes, individual and distinct at first, then blurring together, settling softly, covering everything in quiet white. The story is complete. The winter has ended. Spring is always coming, and tomorrow is always waiting. But right now, in this moment, there's only the gentle pull of sleep, the soft darkness of rest. Thank you for journeying with me tonight through ice and darkness and resilient human spirit. Sweet dreams, wherever you are in this wide world. Until next time, sleep well.